Good evening, everyone. My name is Daniel Aldonade, and today we're going to be talking about schema, which is a topic in cognitive processes. So, what do we think schema is? Schema is a mental framework that is used in organizing information or making sense of the world as we know it to be. So, one of the proponents, normally, schema is not necessarily, or the schema theory is not necessarily attributed to just one person. So, but the person that coined the term schemata or schema is known as Jean Piaget, who is a Swiss developmental psychologist. And in his work, he was working with children and he loved working with children because he believed that children grew the most. They had the most growth compared to adults or compared to um any other timeline or age or group age or cohort of individuals. So let's define schema and let's say what schema is or what we believe schema to be. So we're going to say that schema theory is a collection of concepts relating to cognitive structures that aid in the organization, presentation, evaluation, and application of human knowledge and abilities by segmenting accessible data into useful pieces to facilitate subjective interpretation. Let's do that again. So, schema theory is a collection of concepts relating to cognitive structures that aid in the organization, presentation, evaluation, and application of human knowledge and abilities by segmenting accessible data into useful pieces to facilitate subjective interpretation. So, what does that mean? It means that schemas help us make sense of the world. So, let me give an analogy to help you understand it better. So let's think of our mind as a hard drive, a computer hard drive. And then let's now think of folders within that hard drive. And we know folders represent different things. You can have folders for movies, folders for music, folders for art, folders for anything. So the schemas are like those folders. They are like classifications of the information that we know. So for example, how do you know that I am recording a video? Because of you already have a schema that is related to the process or what it means or the details that are entailed in recording a video. So let's take another example. So let's say our mind is the hard drive, the schema is the folders within that hard drive, and then the files within those folders are like individual pieces of information that we know. So let's say, for example, when a baby is born, when they give birth to a baby, this baby does not know anything about the world, has no knowledge. It's like tabula rasa, nothing, does not have any prior information about what the world is. So let's say when they come to life or when they come to the world, the only thing they know how to do is to poop, to cry, to grasp things, and a few other functions. So schemas are like building blocks of information that we know, or that building blocks of those information that we know about. So let's say they now start to grasp things around them. It's because they're already using the former schema that they have of grasping things. We're going to talk about that later because that's relating to assimilation. But let's not go too far. Let's take it a step at a time. So now we're talking about schema theory, definitions of schema. What does schema mean? So schema means that schema is just plainly a mental framework that is used in the organization and presentation of knowledge within our world, or to that we can say within our world, or to aid subjective interpretation of our world. So let me give you a more robust definition. So we say schema theory is a collection of concepts relating to cognitive structures that aid in the organization, presentation, evaluation, and application of human knowledge and abilities by segmenting accessible data into useful pieces to facilitate subjective interpretation. So the keywords in this is organization, presentation, evaluation, and application of human knowledge and abilities. So if we want to use a simple definition of schema, we say schema is segmenting accessible data into useful pieces to facilitate subjective interpretation. Schema is subjecting accessible data into useful pieces to facilitate subjective interpretation. So you take data that you have, you segment it into portions. Like we said, the files and the folders, you segment it into folders, and then you use it to facilitate subjective interpretation of the world around you. All right. So another thing we can think of schemas are as, or a practical application, or a way we can conceptualize the concept in our head, is by relating schemas to a filing cabinet. I know that some of us might not be familiar with what a filing cabinet is, but let's assume we've seen a filing cabinet in a movie or anything, and we see that in those filing cabinets, each drawers have their folders there, and then each of those folders will have like files and all of that. So for us here, those files are like our experiences, knowledge base, the things that we see, the things we hear based off our culture, what we experience, how we move through life. Those are those information that are now that are now compacted into a folder to form the schema. I don't know if you understand me, but let me come again. So it's like the world around you. The world around you consists of knowledge, information, relationships, different things that that impede on our senses. So we pick those things and then we now put them into folders to make sense of the world, because when those things are scattered, our brain is going into overdrive, cannot make sense of anything, because the brain is always trying to make sense of things. That's what the human brain tries to do. It always tries to make sense of things, or at least the human mind, because let's use the human mind so that because the brain is more concrete and more solid. So let's use the human mind to conceptualize all of this things. So the human mind always wants to make sense of things, because without making sense of things, without organizing the information that we get or the information that we know, it just goes into overdrive and everything feels, it's just everywhere. So because of the propensity for our mind to constantly try to organize the information that we know into blocks, into useful blocks, that's where schema comes in. So okay, so we would say that schema is a mental framework we use to make sense of new information and organize our thoughts. So let's say you want to define schema. The first line you're going, schema is a mental framework that we use to make sense of new information and organize our thoughts. Then you now go further to now explain it as how schema theory is a collection of concepts relating to cognitive structures that aid in the organization, presentation, evaluation, and application of human knowledge and abilities by segmenting accessible data into useful pieces to facilitate subjective interpretation. You might have to rewind a little bit to be able to get this, but just know that schemas are mental frameworks. And what do? They try to organize the world around us. Do we understand it? Okay. Um, let's go to the history of schema, or to talk a little bit about the history of schema before we continue the conversation. So schema theory is majorly attributed to Jean Piaget, like I said earlier, and Jean Piaget worked on cognitive development, and his test subjects were mostly kids, and that's because he felt that kids grew the most. So another person that also worked or that contributed greatly to the schema theory is Frederick Barlett. So Frederick Barlett was basically working on abstract frameworks in the mind that organizes information. So in as this video progresses, we're going to talk more in depthly on them. So so what Piaget was saying was that children develop schemas and they use them as building block of information. Let's go back to our grasping example that we had earlier. So you see how when a child is born, they really just know some basic things, and they have like a very limited understanding of the world around them. So let's say they only know how to grasp, and grasping is because they've already been grasping from the tummy, like they've been doing the whole movement before. So because of their sense of grasping, which is already a schema that is within them, they are able to take that existing schema to take in new information. So what do I mean by that? They're taking in new information by um okay, they see a toy that their mom or their parent gets for them, and then they're trying to hold on to that toy, they're trying to grasp that toy and trying to do all of that. So the new information is the toy, and the existing schema is their ability to grasp. So with trying to make sense of that new information. They are making use of an existing schema that exists within them, trying to now say, okay, I want to grasp. I mean, they're not conceptualizing it that way and saying I want to grasp, but you understand the concept. They are now using that existing schema and grasping with it because they already have like that understanding of how to grasp. So the new information is the toy and how to now have a relationship with that toy. So basically, what Jean Piaget was majorly talking about is that when it comes to schemas, especially with children, they form simple schemas first, and then those schemas now develop into more complex schemas. So let's take this example. So, for example, now you're a child. Assume that you're a 2 year old or you're a 1 year old, or let's say you're a 2 year old, because at that form you're already in your pre-operational stage. So let's say you're a 2 year old, and then you have a dog in the house. Your mom has been telling you, oh, this is a doggy, this is a doggy, this is a doggy. And when you look at doggies, what are the information that you're picking up about a dog? You know that a dog has 4 legs. You know that a dog plays with you as a 2 year old. You know that your mommy says, like, you can put, because it's your dog, you can put your hand on his face and he's not going to do anything. He tries to smuggle up on you and all of that. Those are the different information that you're getting about a dog. So anytime you see a four-legged animal, even when you see a cat that is walking on 4 legs, you go and you tell your mom, mommy, that's a doggy, that's a doggy. So irrespective of the fact that that conceptualization is wrong, we can see how schemas develop. So at first, the simple schema is that, oh, a dog has 4 legs, a dog plays with me. That's the easiest conceptualization that a 2 year old can have. But when that simple schema wants to develop into a more complex schema, you have more information added. And more information are added in two ways, which is assimilation and accommodation, which was proposed by Jean Piaget too. So in assimilation, we're going to talk more on it, but let me just give a more background knowledge on it. In assimilation, um, this individual or this person, the new information is being added to an existing schema in the mind. So let's use the dog example to make sense of that. So, for example, now this 2 year old knows that a dog has 4 legs, a dog smiles, a dog barks, and a dog plays with him or her. That's how they understand a dog to be. So, when they now get new information and then they now notice that, oh, a dog can poop, a dog poops, they see the dog pooing on the floor. That's a new information. They take that new information and then they add it to the existing schema that they have about dogs. So let's say they now grow up a little bit. Let's say they're now 3, 4, and their mom takes them to a horse riding car park or a horse riding track, and then they see a horse, and then they go, mommy, that's a dog, that's a dog, or mommy, doggy, doggy. That's like, they think that the information that they have is the same information that they knew as per a dog has 4 legs, a dog plays with you. So it's now left when the mother now says, oh no, that's not a dog, that's a horse. Say after me, a horse. A horse is taller, a horse has a tail, a longer tail, a horse has a mare, a horse has like more information about the horse. They now try to make sense of that new information. So with accommodation, it's about when the individual does not have any existing schemas to make sense of that new information. So with accommodation happens in two ways: either by modifying the existing schema, modifying it in a way of like trying to shift it and trying to like sieve it in a way where it makes sense of that existing schema. Like they try to change that schema by now correcting it and saying, oh, when there are different types of four-legged animals, that's already modifying that schema. Because initially, the initial schema is that all four-legged animals are dogs. So in modifying that schema, they're now saying, oh, um, there are some four-legged animals that are not dogs. So that's modifying it. It's on that accommodation. Then the next one is changing the schemas entirely or creating a new folder on its own. So for example, now a way that that 3-year-old can make sense of the new information that the mother has told him is by creating a brand new file and putting that file, naming it horse. A horse is taller, a horse has 4 legs. You see how those details now add in to make a more complex schema. So that's just like a basic way to help us understand this concept. So the more we grow, the more we make sense of the world around us, the more information we take in, the more complex our schema becomes, and the more complex our schema starts to develop. So that's basically what Piaget was trying to say. Piaget was trying to say that children develop schemas and use them as building blocks. What was once a simple schema can then become a more complex schema. So these more complex schemas explain a longer list of concepts within the world as we know it. So schemas start out from the beginning beliefs we have about lives, and then they develop further and they build up. So let's take, for example, a birthday party. Let's say the first time that we go to a birthday party, we're going to have noticed that we would not have known how to behave, would have clung to the garments of our mother's clothes, and we would have just been out of place, not knowing exactly how to behave, or would have behaved in a manner that is not appropriate with a birthday party. But as time goes on, like the second time we go to a birthday party, we now know that a birthday party includes cutting cake, singing happy birthday songs, includes certain games and all of that. So those informations are what form our birthday schemas. So same with other scripts that we have with life. So we have to know that human beings are meaning making creatures, and that's exactly why schemas became a thing, because we are constantly trying to make sense of the world around us and trying to make sense of things. Let's take this riddle. Let's take okay, yeah, we also need to know that schemas can also produce inaccurate judgments. So let's take this riddle. A father and son were in an accident. The father was killed immediately, and the son was brought to the hospital for surgery. In the OR, a doctor came in, looked at the boy, and said, I can't operate on him. He's my son. Who is the doctor? I want us to think about it for a second and then see. So, we're talking about the features of schema. So, categorically, there are about 10 features of schemas that we are going to be discussing today, and then there are schemas features. Number one is organizational framework. Number two is knowledge based. Number three is dynamic and adaptive. Number four is cultural and individual variability. Number five is guides perception and attention. Number six is fills gap in information. Number seven is facilitates memory. Number eight is influences behavior and expectations. Number nine is supports generalization. And number 10 is resistant to change. So the features of schemas are like the characteristics of schema, meaning the fabric or what schemas contain, that kind of thing. So let's discuss it further, so we're not just having like broad concepts of what these things mean. So when we say that a feature of schema is organizational framework, what do we mean? It means that schemas help us structure our knowledge. They organize our knowledge. So that's one of the features of schema. So you would see, based off what's projected on your screen, you're going to see some examples of what it means for schema to be able to organize your knowledge. So let's give more examples to help us understand that concept. Okay, so let's assume that we go to a restaurant. When we go to a restaurant, we know that, okay, let's say we go to our favorite restaurant. We've been there a couple of times. You know that when we get there, we sit down. After sitting down, we call for the waiter. When the waiter comes, the waiter takes our order. We wait for a while, they deliver our food. After we eat our food, we pay for our food, and then we leave the restaurant. That's like the script or the pattern in which that particular act is done. So when it comes to organizational framework, we are saying that schemas help us organize our knowledge, helps us organize what we know. So whenever we are faced with what we know how to now structure our behaviors to match it. So for example, imagine somebody is shouting at the restaurant, or the waiter is throwing your food from the stand. You are having to crawl to go and pay. Like, that's just brings a lot of chaos. That brings a lot of chaos. So one feature of schema is that it helps us organize our knowledge. So that's the organizational framework, which is a feature of schema, or we can say characteristics of schema. Organizational framework, it helps us organize our knowledge. So number 2 feature of schema is that schema is knowledge based. And what does that mean? It means that it is built from prior experience. So what we know before is what forms, or like we were talking about assimilation and accommodation and all of those things. So what we know before forms our opinion of what schemas we currently hold. So it is built from prior knowledge. We talked about how schemas build on top of each other. So a characteristic or a feature of schema is that it is built from prior knowledge. So let's just give this example. Let's say we know how to make jollof rice. Like, this is a different example from what you're going to find on your screen, but this is just another example to help you understand the concept better. So let's say we know how to make jollof rice. We know that, okay, we add in our jollof rice schema, that's the file that has jollof rice in our mind. We know, okay, put groundnut oil on the fire, or whatever oil you choose to use. Dice onions, put onions, put sachet tomato, put your blended pepper, put your seasoning, pour your rice in, stir it, add water, cover, allow it to cook. That's what is in my jollof rice schema. So assuming that somebody has a different schema, let's say a Ghanaian now, they believe that you should add milk to your jollof rice. You see, that's one of the reasons why we have this conflict of, which jollof rice is better, blah 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 blah. And that stems from the fact that we each have different schemas when it comes to cooking that particular dish. So basically, it just tells us how schemas are based from prior knowledge, or they are knowledge based, meaning that they are built from prior experience. All right, so yeah, that's just how it means. Because, okay, when you see somebody have a different schema for that same thing that you're currently doing, you're like, oh, that's not right, that's not going right. So it's because of how schemas are built from what we already know. So another feature of schema is cultural and individual variability. So what does that mean? It just means that schema differs from culture to culture, and it also differs from individual to individual. So for example, let's say in the Yoruba culture, they believe that a sign of respect is by prostrating, by kneeling, and all of that. So if you take that same schema to another country and then you act out that schema, it would feel strange to that culture, or the new culture they're trying to act out that schema in. So just say, for example, now most people that move from Nigeria to the diaspora, and then they ask their boss, how was your night? It feels very strange, and they feel like it's an intrusion on their privacy, as opposed to how we normally would ask anybody in Nigeria, how was your night? So it just means that schema varies from culture to culture, and it also varies from individual to individual, because of, these schemas are based on our experiences. It means that because of people's experiences differ, it just makes sense that their schemas will also differ. So moving on, schema guides perception and attention. What does that mean? So let's do this example, the traffic schema, which is different from what you're going to see on your screen, but just to give further details on these concepts that we're trying to explain. So let's say the traffic schema, if you are in traffic, we know that, okay, downfall buses are trying to swerve. We know that in Lagos traffic, downfall buses are trying to swerve, area boys are collecting tolls. We already have a very specific schema to how to coordinate ourselves in traffic. We know that, okay, we're not going to allow many people to enter our front, all that kind of thing. So market people are also selling plantain chips and all of that in Lagos traffic. You already know that that's the schema of Lagos traffic. So because you're paying attention to that particular schema, it will be hard for you to notice a dashboard or a advertisement board that is advertising a program. And that's because schemas guide our perception and our attention. Okay, another common example that we can relate to is, for example, now if you're on WhatsApp and then you're arguing on WhatsApp group about who is better between Burna Boy and Whiskey, all that kind of thing, you're already going hard and hard on the argument. It will be very easy for you to miss your bus stop if you're in a bus and as you're having that argument. And that's because your current schema at that point is the one that is arguing to the point that you're making on WhatsApp. So other information now fits in the background. That's what it means by schema is guiding your perception and your attention. Next one is that schema helps fills gap in information. What does this mean? It means that because of the schema that we have, we kind of like complete sentences by ourselves. So for example, now if you're in a church, which is different from the example you're saying, if you're in a church and then the pastor say, can somebody shout, in your head you're already thinking hallelujah, and that's because you've come to church a few times and you already know that this is what happens. Or the same way that in certain churches you already know that, okay, first thing is opening prayer, second thing is praise and worship, from praise and worship to this and this. You already know the sequence of events that are already going to happen. So anytime something different happens, your brain is quick to pick it up and is saying, what's going on, what's going on? So that's how schemas help fill gaps in information, because you already know what's going to happen next based off the schema that you already have concerning a specific event or a specific scenario. Okay, so the seventh feature of schema is that schema facilitates memory. What does that mean? It means that, for example, now if you're in a family gathering and you're asked to memorize the name of your cousins, your nephews, your grandparents, your aunties, your uncles, it is easier for you to memorize those names because they have a relationship between them, compared to if you go to a bus stop and then they ask you to memorize 20 random names. And this is because, like I said earlier, humans like to make meaning of things. At least our mind likes to make meaning of things. And then when you have events that are too scattered about with no relationship between them, it is harder for us to remember those events compared to when you have events that have like more streamlined relationship between them, or there's some kind of relationship within them. So because of that relationship that's between them, it's easier for us to make connections and be able to remember all the events that are existing within that relationship. So to the facilitating memory part, we'll talk more about it when we're discussing Frederick Bartlett, who is one of the proponents of the schema theory. So we're going to talk about that further. So the number eight feature of schema is that schema influences behavior and expectations. And what does this mean? It means that schemas help us know what to expect. So for example, if we go to an Owambe and then we don't see music, nobody's spraying, nobody's dancing, there's no jollof rice, there's no food, at that point our schemas are already thrown off guard, because what's going on? This is supposed to be an Owambe, what's happening? So it means that with the schemas that we have concerning certain events and certain things, it helps form our expectations of those things. So that's one feature of schema. Another feature of schema is that it supports generalization. And what does this mean? It means that when you are exposed to one information about a particular event, you kind of like generalize that information to a group or to like, okay, let me just make it in an example manner so it's more understandable. Let's assume that you meet somebody, let's say you're abroad, you meet somebody that speaks pidgin, you meet the same person loves jollof rice, and then you see the same person saying auntie, uncle, that kind of thing, or speaks Yoruba. So because of those schemas of how you feel like Nigerians speak these languages, Nigerians like this particular food, you can already, based off your schema, you can already say, oh, this person is Nigerian. And that's some form of generalization. Like, you don't necessarily know this person is Nigerian. This person might not even be Nigerian, but because of your schema already tells you that these are the qualities, or this is what exists within your Nigerian schema, it's easier for you to generalize that to the entire population or the particular thing that you're looking at, even without having the full information about that thing. I hope you get it. The 10th feature of schema, which is the final feature of schema that we're going to be discussing today, is that schema is resistant to change. It is very resistant to change, and that's why the concept of cognitive dissonance is a thing, because with cognitive dissonance we're trying to change our schemas, and schemas resist change. So okay, so let's just assume this thing. It's just the same way that when we were trying to teach our grandmas how to use WhatsApp, and then they're so confused, they're like asking you the same question 10,000 times, because their schemas about how communication should work with phone or whatever does not include the schemas that work with smartphones or that work with certain apps like WhatsApp and all of that. Or let's take it further down, or the same way that you're trying to convince your parents that you don't need to have a university education. Meanwhile, they have a schema that education is the best legacy. So that all those arguments is a very practical example of how schema is resistant to change. Another example is, for example, let's say your grandma now feels like marriage should include dowry payments, should include church wedding, should include a man and a woman. So when they're confronted with the schema of maybe gay couples getting married and all of that, and they're thinking this is witchcraft, what's going on? So that's how schemas are very, very slow to change, and they are not open to change. They're very resistant to change. So I hope you understand the features of schema. And just to take it back a bit to the previous redo that I introduced earlier on about who the doctor is. The doctor is the mother of the boy, and the reason why most of us would not have thought of it in terms of like saying that the doctor is the mother of the boy is because we have a schema that surrounds who a doctor should be, because we feel like when we think doctor, we're thinking someone in a white scope, preferably a man, that has a stethoscope around his neck and all of that kind of thing. So this is just showing us how schemas actually form our interpretations of the world, and how schemas actually define how we see the world and how we actually interpret the events that happen around us. So I hope that we also understand how schema also aids in biases, in stereotypes and all of that kind of thing, because they kind of like align together. So next up, we're going to be talking about the types of schemas.